we need to talk about trauma as something that has a profound impact on political discourse. Hi, my name is Cornelius and I am an egalitarian. Our most ancient state as human beings is as egalitarian communities. The primary behavioral difference between primates and humans is that humans engage in alloparenting. That is, the entire community shares in the parenting and care of all the children and all the vulnerable people within that community. Alloparenting requires that we have the ability to modulate our emotions, to regulate our emotions so that they don't get out of hand. And it requires that we have the kind of thinking that can think of multiple relationships over multiple generations and manage those relationships healthfully. And working together in mutual aid requires creativity. These are the fundamental characteristics of all the older egalitarian cultures. They worked together, they cared for each other, they were incredibly creative, they were intelligent, and they were emotionally mature. Trauma undermines that entirely. Chronic trauma completely changes the way our brains and our emotions operate. A traumatized community has great difficulty in managing its relationships. We can see that in the impacts of colonization on indigenous communities that were old communities that were really stable and very healthy. The trauma of colonization undermined all their ways of maintaining their healthy ways. The history of Europe is a history of warfare going back 3,000-4,000 years. Constant warfare. Hierarchies of power that deploy violence in order to maintain themselves. War after war after war after war. Trauma after trauma after trauma upon generations after generations after generations, and it's never really resolved. The so-called peace conference in Switzerland this weekend doesn't include Russia. How can you have a peace conference when you don't have all the people who are part of the problem in the discussion? The 76 years of abuse and trauma heaped upon the Palestinian indigenous people by the Zionist colony and its allies is another example of long-term unresolved trauma being perpetuated by wealth as power. The dysregulated emotional state of public figures like Trump and Johnson and Farage and Hitler and Stalin and all the rest of them is a product of unresolved trauma. Now, I'm not trying to give these people an excuse. I'm merely saying we have to understand this. And if we understand the impact that trauma has, then we can begin to do the work of resolving the problems created by trauma and traumatization remaining unresolved. In England right now, there is the trauma of poverty. There is the trauma of the attacks on the disabled, the vulnerable, the marginalized, the attacks on the trans community, the attacks on different religious groups by different groups within society. These are all causing more trauma. So part of our political process has to be looking at trauma, understanding it, and breaking the cycles of traumatization in order to give people the time to recover from trauma and regain a balanced, healthy way of being. And this is not being discussed in political discourse anywhere that I am aware of. And resolving trauma and preventing more trauma from happening is the equivalent of our work with the environment. It is like a psychological, environmental work to make our psychological environment healthy. Now, this is totally possible because we are evolved to be healthy. We're not evolved as organisms to be unhealthy. Biology does not bring about unhealthy species. Sure, asteroids can hit the place, a volcano can go and wipe out a species. Yet in the way biology works, all species are mandated to be at their optimal, healthy, behavioral state. And yes, disease happens. Accidents happen. There is a variation of health within any species. That said, biology does not make species to be unhealthy. And finally, what healthy species do in every case that we've ever studied is they nurture the world around them by the way they behave in their natural behavior. So recall, the difference between humans and primates is shared parenting, how we are designed, evolved to care for each other, to care for all our children together. That's who we really are. Let's bring that into our political discussions.